what are some of the economic lessons that we can learn? I know that our country is relatively young, and we have tried in various eras in our country under various administrations, presidents. We have tried different economic policies. What can we learn so that people today, especially young people, can understand that the left's demonizing of capitalism and the right supporting the free market aren't just abstract Twitter battles, that
Right.
we've tried this and one thing works and one thing doesn't.
We absolutely see that. In the 1920s, when we had exploding debt from World War I and the Progressive era, and then also 12% unemployment, Harding and Coolidge just said, okay, we're going to do two things. We're going to cut tax rates in half, more than in half in some cases, and we're going to cut the annual budget. I mean, isn't that a shock? I mean, today,
Can you imagine if someone proposed that
out of the
today?
box, more than half. The annual budget was cut. I mean, all farm subsidies were thrown out. We had a government steel company. It was closed down. So all sorts of things were cut. And we went from literally cutting the national budget in half and cutting tax rates in half. In 2 years, we had unemployment of 2%. We went from 12 to 2%. And we had a flurry of inventions. Radio, you get in the 1920s, air conditioning. Then one invention leads to another. We get air conditioning, and so movie theaters, which were the first entity to be air conditioned, we got to talking movies. See,
Yeah.
because now that we have more attendance, we can experiment in that direction. And so you have low tax rates. Entrepreneurs are able to keep the capital that they invest. And so they're able to keep going, and it was an exploding economy. And so it was the most prosperous economy, one of the most prosperous decades in American history. We did the equivalent of adding California and Texas to the national economy in one decade.
It's phenomenal. And kids aren't taught this history.
Well, then we undid it because Hoover and Roosevelt started intruding in the federal government. The Federal Reserve tinkered with interest rates. We had a high tariff that restricted imports. Then we raised the income tax. And then when Roosevelt came in, he raised income taxes even more, up to the point, very few people know it was this high, it was 94% on all income over $200,000. Well, I wonder why the Great Depression persisted.
Oh my God.
I wonder why entrepreneurs aren't getting in. They get to keep 6%. And so they don't invest, and so it perpetuates. And so these are the kinds of lessons. When you see those rates going up, there's huge consequences for that happening. And we see that with Bernie Sanders and others today, making those proposals. They've never worked. We've always had high unemployment when it's happened. We cut the rates, we free up the economy, entrepreneurs emerge, the investments take place.
So how would you apply that to what we're seeing today with this recession that shall not be called a recession? And the Federal Reserve responding by increasing the interest rate by 75 points?
Yes, or you could ratchet it back at administration and said this recovery that we won't call a recovery.
A trans recovery.
Because we cut the tax rate. Again,
Yeah.
President Trump was doing many of the same things that Coolidge had done and Reagan did before him. And sure enough, we started attracting capital back from abroad. We had a tremendous reduction of people getting food stamps and on unemployment. And we had relative prosperity in the economy. And then we began to change the maneuvers, and it starts moving in the other direction. So what we're seeing with the last two administrations parallel what we saw a little bit with, say, Coolidge and then later with Roosevelt.